while the ambition is certainly there, we have many very critical saying that the targets that are out there are slightly too ambitious, that we cannot even be thinking about exporting surpluses where we're still falling short in catering to domestic food supply. How realistic are the targets being set?
Yeah, first of all, I have to thank you for having me in your studio. And before I continue, I should explain to you what AFRAC stands for. AFRAC is African Rural Agricultural and Credit Association. Mainly consists and often for central banks, commercial banks, microfinance banks, and all institutions who has interests to rural finance in Africa. The association is 34 years, and the headquarters is in Nairobi, Kenya. As you mentioned earlier, we're going to have a forum, central bank forum, whereby we're going to bring regulators, practitioners, policy makers, farmers, researchers together to discuss issues, affecting all challenges facing food security in Africa, and how the mitigants, the solutions, and how can we solve them together. As an association, we believe that to move agriculture forward or to develop our rural Africa, it needs a collective support of policymakers, regulators, private and public sectors.
Saleh, let's take it forward though, because we've got limited time on the show, so let's take it forward to those targets being set by the various entities that you've just outlined. Are they realistic targets in terms of what Africa can actually produce?
Well, it's very realistic, because whenever you are planning, you have to aim high. But in the short time, what we are looking at food security, to make sure food is available at a balanced manner to everybody, all people, no matter their class. And we're working very hard together with policymakers, regulators, researchers to see that we achieve our targets. But planning is a different thing. Achieving the target is another. So what we are focusing is good for planning purposes, but for actual achievement, I think we're getting there, and we'll get there with concerted effort of all stakeholders.
Of course, so while we've got those targets in place, what are some of the top challenges farmers or the agricultural sector faces in hitting them, and what's it going to take to overcome them?
The problem is, when you talk about farmers, farmers consist of small-scale farmers, medium-scale and large-scale farmers. And fundamentally, our focus in Africa is the small-scale farmers, who constitute over 50% of the farming population. As a matter of fact, they produce over 90% of the food produce in Africa. They need our support, and what we are saying is they are facing a lot of challenges in terms of market and market information. They are facing challenges of productivity. The production level compared to certain countries is really very low. They cannot break even. We're talking about input supply. The cost of input is is not within reach. In most cases, local small farmers cannot even break through. So these are our constraints. And the extension services and the research and extension linkage is not there. Or at least even if it's there, it's within reach of farmers.
Well, in terms of finding solutions, just yesterday we spoke to the CEO of NEPAD, Ibrahim Miyaki, who highlighted that pursuing public-private sector partnerships has not been as aggressive in the past as it should have possibly been, and that mobilizing private sector investment into the agricultural space is key. Do you share that view?
Yeah, sure. I share that one. As a matter of fact, we have an upcoming event in June in Kampala, Uganda. And we're working with Making Finance Work for Africa. It's also a platform whereby government agencies, governments, donor agencies are coming together to coordinate their activities. Because one of our problems in the continent is we lack coordination. And there needs to be kind of a harmonized way of approaching the challenge of financing agriculture. So we're going to have a very, continent-wide conference, which will bring about 200 to 300 experts to discuss policy challenges, and to discuss solutions on how we can move rural and agricultural development forward.
As you see it right now, Saleh, is there enough incentive for private sector to get involved?
Sure. Our focus is, our belief is governments, they have no business in business. Our aim totally is to enhance the environment, to make sure it is attractive to the private sector. We are doing everything possible, and this is one of the goals. We are collaborating with the donor agencies, the World Bank, the IMF, IPAD, FAO, African Union, NEPAD, to come together and discuss challenges, to discuss best practices, to see how we can replicate best practices in some countries in Africa. That's our goal, and by the grace of God, we are going to achieve our goal.
I ask that because in South Africa, for example, equitable ownership of land remains essential to safeguarding democracy in the country. In that context, then, there's a tightrope that needs to be walked, balancing land reform policy and food security. On the other hand, how do you see this impacting development of the sector? Because it certainly isn't only a South African phenomenon.
Well, see, our goal is not to consider to isolate South Africa only. As I've said earlier, we have an association consisting of over 100 members, cutting across over 30 countries in Africa. This is one of our goals. We are going to bring all the policy makers from South Africa, from Nigeria, from Mali, from Burkina Faso, Uganda, Kenya, to sit down to discuss land reforms, to discuss some challenges regarding access to finance, outreach, rural development. I think this is another platform whereby we'll discuss the South African issue, we'll discuss the Zimbabwean issue, we'll discuss Nigerian issues. The goal is we have a cross-cutting issues that really will be discussed at that conference. And I invite you personally to be there, and we'll find time to discuss this and other issues at greater length.